I'm Brittany. This is Arthur. And welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch and read gay things. We are continuing with King's Rising, the third book in Captive Prince. I am sorry for being a few minutes late today. The tripod that I currently have is just a frightful bitch, and it's been giving me shit today. Fortunately, there's a new one sitting on my bed waiting to be unpacked, but it did not get here in time today to go up for this stream. But that should be done by Thursday, and then we won't have to worry about that anymore. But here we are, and we are counting this stream that is about to happen. We have 2 left in King's Rising. We have 2 left in the main trilogy of Captive Prince. And while there are bonus stories that we'll be reading in a compilation called Summer Palace, yeah, which we will be reading as well, the main story concludes this week. We get to do that this week. And kind of wondering how she's going to do it, because just with my memory of certain things that need to be happening, she's cut out a pretty tough challenge for herself. So we read for a couple of hours, and we take a break around halfway through, where we go back to the Gaywatch break room, which is the place that you were before I started this stream. Please no spoilers in the chat, because there are always people new to the books who are in here and hanging out. So please no spoilers. I have read this before. I've long read and loved this series. I just hadn't read it in a second. So there are some things I have forgotten, apparently, as I have learned. But I have read this before. That's actually a first for this channel. Typically, I'm reading something that I've never read before, and it's more of like a book reaction. Not so with this. Ooh. There are also trigger warnings down in the description in case you need to avail yourself of them, which you might, probably, should, maybe. So, we are on page, and I remembered this time. We are actually giving away this trilogy, all 3 books. Did I remember to bring the other 2 over here? No. But these 3 books that I have read on stream are going to be given away to somebody in the US or Canada. So if you would like to be entered into sweepstakes to win the Captive Prince trilogy, you can comment on this stream, not in the chat, in an actual comment on the stream, that you want to be entered. And then on Thursday, at the end of the stream, most likely, actually, depending on how it goes, we might wait until like the last stream, so finishing a Summer Palace, before I actually pull a winner. But when the time comes, I will be randomizing the list of people who have submitted and drawing a winner. And then you will get these lovely covers and this trilogy that I have been, banging against walls and crying over and all that jazz. You will get these. So please enter if you would like to win one of those in the US or Canada. And we are on, I'm so excited, I've just been throwing this book everywhere in just the 3 minutes that I've been talking to you. We are on page 233 for, we had started chapter 14, but we had only gotten like a few pages in, and this one's a bit of a lengthy-ish chapter, so. Mari, I see your comment about how to read the short stories. Thank you. They had 2 hours before the sentries returned to the main fort and saw that Lady Jocasta had not arrived, at which point the captain would have a slow dawning realization. Not long after that, Castor's men would appear, pounding down the road after them. Jocasta gave him a cool look when they took out the cloth from her mouth and undid her bindings. Her skin reacted like Laurent's to confinement, red wheals where they had tied her wrists with silk rope. Laurent held out his hand to escort her back from the supply wagon into the main wagon, a bored Varetian gesture. Her eyes had the same bored look as she took his hand. "You're lucky we're alike," she said, stepping down. They looked at one another like 2 reptiles. That's a banger opening paragraph. I'm just going to lift the microphone up a little higher here. Ooh. In order to avoid Castor's patrols, they were riding for a childhood sanctuary of sorts. The estate of Heston of Thoas? Thoas is how it immediately strikes me. Heston's estate was thickly wooded and contained ample places to hide and wait for patrols to pass, until interest in them slackened. But more than that, Damon had spent hours of his boyhood in the orchards and the vineyards, as his father took repast with Heston on his tours of the northern provinces. Heston was fiercely loyal and would shelter Damon from an invading army. It was familiar countryside, Achielos in summer, part rocky hillside covered with brush and scrub, and stretches of cultivatable land scented with orange blossom. Wooded patches of concealing trees were rare, and none of them filled Damon with confidence that they could hide a wagon. With the danger of patrols growing, Damon liked less and less the plan they had for him to leave the wagons unprotected and ride ahead, to scout the territory and make his presence known to Heston. But they had no choice. "Keep the wagons on course," Damon said to Nicandros. "I'll be swift, and I'll take our best rider with me." "That's me," said Laurent, wheeling his horse. They made fast time, Laurent light and sure in the saddle. About half a mile out from the estate, they dismounted and tethered their horses out of sight off the road. They proceeded the rest of the way on foot, pushing scrub out of their path, sometimes bodily. Sweeping a branch out of his face, Damon said, "I thought when I was king I wouldn't be doing this kind of thing again." "You underestimated the demands of Achielan kingship," said Laurent. Damon stepped on a rotten log. He unpicked the bottom of his garment from a thorn bush. He sidestepped a jut of razor-sharp granite. "The undergrowth was thinner when I was a boy. Or you were." Laurent said it, holding back a low tree branch for Damon, who stepped past with a rustle. Cresting the final rise together, they saw their destination spread out before them. The estate of Heston of Thoas was a long, low series of cool, marble-fluted buildings that opened onto private gardens, and from there to picturesque orchards of nectarine and apricot. Seeing it, Damon could only think how good it would be to arrive there, to share the beauty of its architecture with Laurent, to take their rest, watching the sun set from the open balcony, Heston offering his warm-hearted hospitality, ordering him simple delicacies and arguing with him on some obscure point of philosophy. The whole estate was dotted with convenient rocks that protruded through the thin covering of soil. Damon tracked them. They provided a covered route from the scraggle of trees where he stood with Laurent all the way down to the house gate, and from there he knew the way into Heston's study, with its doors out onto the gardens, a place where he could enter and find Heston alone. "Stop," said Laurent. Damon stopped. Something about the immediacy with which Damon follows Laurent's order, you know? We were talking about that in the book chat today. Following Laurent's gaze, he saw a dog lounging on its chain near a small penned field full of horses on the west side of the estate. They were downwind. It had not yet begun to bark. "There are too many horses," said Laurent. Damon looked again at the pen, and his stomach sank. It held at least 50 horses, in a small overstuffed patch of field that was never meant to contain them. It would be grazed out too quickly. And they were not the lighter steeds bred for an aristocrat to ride. They were soldiers' mounts, all of them, big-chested and heavy with muscle to carry the weight of a rider in armor, transported from Casus to Thrace to service the northern garrisons. "Jocasta," he said. His hands clenched into fists. Castor might have remembered that they had hunted here as boys, but only Jocasta would have guessed that Damon would stop here if he traveled south, and sent men in advance, denying him a safe harbor. "I can't leave Heston to Castor's men," said Damon. "I owe him." "He's only in danger if you're found here. Then he's a traitor," Laurent said. Their eyes met, and the understanding passed between them quickly and wordlessly. They needed another way to get the wagons off the road, and they needed to do it avoiding the sentries posted at Heston's gate. "There's a stream a few miles to the north that runs through woodland," Damon said. "It will cover our tracks and keep us off the road." "I'll take care of the sentries," said Laurent. "You left the dress in the wagon," said Damon. Thank you. I do have other ways of getting past a sentry. I'm sorry. Oh. They understood each other. The light through the trees dappled Laurent's hair, which was longer now than it had been in the palace, and showing signs of minor disarray. It had a twig in it. Damon said, "The stream is north of that second rise. We'll wait for you downstream of its second meander." Laurent nodded and slipped away, wordlessly. There was no sign of a blonde head, but somehow the dog got loose and went streaking through the yard to where the unfamiliar horses were penned. A yappy dog in an overstuffed pen had a predictable effect on the horses. They bucked, bolted, and burst from the enclosure. The grazing in Heston's private garden being excellent, when the rails came down, the horses streamed out to partake of it, and to partake of the grazing in the adjacent crop fields, and of the grazing quite far away, over the eastern hill. The spasming excitement of the dog egged them on, as did the sylph-like actions of a ghost, untying ropes, slipping open rails. Returning to his own mount, Damon smiled grimly as he heard the distant Achillean shouts, "The horses! Round up the horses!" They had no horses with which to round up the horses. There was going to be a lot of stomping around on foot, trying to catch mounts and cursing small dogs. Now it was time for his part. The wagons, when he galloped back to them, were even slower than he remembered. Pushed to the fastest gait they could sustain, they seemed to crawl across the countryside. Damon willed them to go faster, which was a sensation like shouting at a snail to run. He felt the hot oppression of the flat fields that seemed to stretch for miles with their weirdly shaped scrubs scattered over the landscape. Nicandros was harsh-faced. Guion and his wife were nervous. They probably felt they had the most to lose, but in fact everyone would lose the same thing, their lives. Everyone but Jocaste. She only said, mildly, "Trouble at Heston's." The stream was a glimmer through the trees when they saw it in the distance. One of the wagons almost jackknifed when they finally drove off the road and down, precariously, to the stream. The other wagon creaked and lurched ominously as it hit the stream bed. There was an awful moment when it seemed the wagons wouldn't travel in the shallow water, that they were trapped here, exposed and visible from the road. 12 soldiers splashed down off their horses into water that came halfway up their sandaled shins and put their back into it. Damon came to stand behind the largest wagon and heaved, his every muscle straining. Slowly, the wagon shifted into the minor swirls of current, the pebbles and stones, along the stream towards the trees. The sound of hooves caused Damon's head to jerk up. "Get to cover, now." They scrambled for the concealing copse ahead, reaching it only a moment before the patrol burst from behind the rise, Castor's men riding flat out. Damon stopped, frozen. Jordan the Varetian stood in one tight bunch, the Achielans in another. Damon had the ridiculous urge to put his hand over his horse's nose and stifle any chance of a whicker. He looked up and saw that Nicandros, grimly, had his hand over Jocaste's mouth and was holding her inside the wagon in a firm grip from behind. Castor's men pounded closer, and Damon tried not to think about their poorly concealed wagon tracks, the bent tree branches, the leaves torn from shrubs, and all the signs that they had dragged 2 wagons off the road. Red capes streaming, the patrol galloped right for them and past them, continuing along the road in the direction of Heston's estate. Eventually, the hoofbeats receded. Silence settled, and everyone breathed. Damon let long minutes go by before he gave the nod, and the wagons began to move, the horses' hooves splashing through the water downstream, deeper into the woodland, away from the road. It got cooler the deeper they went into the trees, the air over the stream cool and the leaves providing cover from the hot sun. There were no sounds here other than that of the water and their own movement through it, absorbed by the trees. Damon called for a halt at the second meander, and they waited. Damon trying not to think about how likely it was that Castor had remembered the day they had found this stream hunting as boys, and whether he had spoken of it fondly with Jocaste. If he had, Jocaste's meticulous planning would have soldiers here already, or coming right for them. The sound of a twig breaking set everyone's hands to their swords, Achillean and Varetian blades drawn soundlessly. Damon waited in the tense silence. Another snapped twig. And then he saw the pale head, and the paler white shirt, a lithe figure palming his way from tree trunk to tree trunk. "You're late," said Damon. "I brought you a souvenir." Laurent tossed Damon an apricot. Damon could feel the quiet exultation of Laurent's men, while the Achielans looked a little dazed. Nicandros passed Laurent his reins. "Is this how you do things in Ver?" "You mean effectively," said Laurent, and swung up onto his horse. Once again, my motto, apparently, for Laurent is, he is such a bitch, and I love him so much. That's a scene break, by the way. I just can't with him. Risk of laming was high, and they made slow progress along the stream bed because they had to protect the wagons. Riders went ahead to ensure the stream didn't deepen or quicken in current, and that the stream bed remained a gentle shale with enough purchase for the wheels. Damon called the halt. They pulled up onto a bank where an outcrop of rock could disguise a small fire. There were granite ruins here, too, which would also provide cover. Damon recognized the shapes, having seen them in Aquitar and more recently at Marlis, though here the ruins were only the remains of a wall, the stones worn and covered in undergrowth. Pallas and Octus put their skills to work and speared fish, which they ate baked and flaky, wrapped in leaves, drinking fortified wine. It was a sweet-tasting supplement to their usual road fare of bread and hard cheese. The horses, tied for the night, grazed a little, waffling the ground gently. Jord and Lydos took first watch, while the others came to sit in a semicircle around their small fire. When Damon came to sit too, everyone suddenly scrambled up and stood, awkwardly. Earlier, Laurent had tossed Damon his bedroll and said, "Unpack this," and Pallas had almost challenged him to a duel for the insult. Sitting down and eating cheese casually with their king was not something that they knew how to do. Damon poured a shallow cup of wine and passed it to the soldier beside him, Pallas, and there was a long silence in which Pallas stood obviously garnering every piece of courage that he had to reach out and take it. Laurent strolled up to the impasse, threw himself down on the log next to Damon, and in an expressionless voice launched into the story of the brothel adventure that had earned him the blue dress, which was so unabashedly filthy it made Lazar blush, and so funny it had Pallas wiping his eyes. Excuse me, Laurent being a storytelling king, along with all the other ways, both metaphorical and literal, in which he is a king? Thank you. Thank you. A tongue that sharp can usually also tell a really good story. The Varetians asked Frank questions about Laurent's escape from the brothel. This led to frank answers, and more eye-wiping, as everyone had opinions about brothels that were translated and mistranslated hilariously. The wine was passed around. Not to be outdone, the Achielans told Laurent about their escape from Castor's soldiers, the crouching in the stream bed, the race in slow wagons, the hiding behind tree fronds. Pallas did a decent impression of Pascal's writing. Lazar watched Pallas with lazy admiration. It wasn't the impression he was admiring. Damon bit into the apricot. Oh my God. Do you know what that is? Do you know what that is? That is that one glorious freaking meme of that one really like beefy, bear-y guy who's like in mid-sentence saying something and like immediately like next to him is like a sprawled twink just looking at him with so much fondness and admiration, and he is like, there's so much like just queer pining in this observation of this glorious man. That is what that is. That is the moment of Lazar and Pallas right there. Amazing. Amazing. Oh. When Damon rose a while later, everyone remembered again that he was the king, but the stiff formality was banished, and he went rather pleased to the bedroll that he had dutifully unpacked, and lay down on it, listening to the sounds of the camp preparing itself to sleep. It was with a little shock that he heard footsteps and the faint sound of a bedroll hitting the earth beside him. Laurent stretched out, and they lay alongside one another under the stars. You smell of horse, said Damon. It's how I got past the dog. He felt a throb of happiness and said nothing, just lay on his back and looked up at the stars. It's like old times, said Damon, though the truth was he had never really had times like this. My first trip to Akielos, said Laurent. Do you like it? It's like Ver, with fewer places to have a bath, said Laurent. When he looked sideways, Laurent was lying on his side, looking back at him. Their postures echoed each other. The stream is right there. You want me wandering around the Akielan countryside naked at night? And then, you smell just as much of horse as I do. More, said Damon. He was smiling. Laurent was a pale shape in the moonlight. Beyond him was the sleeping camp, and the ruins in granite that would crumble over time and fall away forever into the water. Something about that image was truly heartbreaking, and I don't think I can really quantify it at the moment. They're artesian, aren't they? From the old Empire art. They say it used to span both our countries. Like the ruins in Aquitar, said Laurent. He didn't say, and at Marlis. My brother and I used to play there as boys, kill all the Akielans and restore the old empire. My father had the same idea. And look what happened to him. Laurent didn't say that, either. Laurent's breathing was easy, as though he was relaxed and sleepy, lying beside Damon. Damon heard himself say it. There's a summer palace in Eos outside the capital. My mother designed the gardens there. They say it's built on artesian foundations. He thought of the meandering walks, the delicate flowering southern orchids, the sprays of orange blossom. It's cool in summer, and there are fountains and tracks for riding. His pulse beat with uncharacteristic nerves, so that he felt almost shy. When all this is over, we could take horses and stay a week in the palace. Since their night together in Carthus, he hadn't dared to speak about the future. He felt Laurent holding himself carefully, and there was a strange pause. After a moment, Laurent said, softly, I'd like that. Damon rolled onto his back again and felt the words like happiness as he let himself look up again at the wide sweep of stars. That's the end of the chapter. We're on page 245 for chapter 15. Whew. Did I even figure out how much we're reading today? Shit. I don't think I did. Oops. Well, we'll have to make note of that. Hang on. We started in chapter 14. Okay. It was typical of their luck that the wagon, which had held together for 5 days in a stream bed, broke down as soon as they rejoined the road. It sat like a truculent child in the middle of the dirt, the second wagon crowded uncomfortably behind it. Lazar, emerging from under the wagon with a smudge on his cheek, pronounced it a broken axle. Damon, who, as a prince of the blood, did not excel at wagon repairs, nodded knowledgeably and ordered his men to fix it. Everyone dismounted and got to work propping up the wagon, cutting down a young tree for wood. That was when a squadron of Akielan soldiers appeared on the horizon. Damon held out his hand for silence. Total silence. The hammering stopped. Everything stopped. There was a clear view across the plain all the way to the trotting squadron in tight formation. 50 soldiers traveling northwest. If they come this way, said Nicandros in a low voice. Hey! Laurent called out. He was pulling himself up from the front wheel onto the wagon top. He had a swath of yellow silk in his hand, and he stood on the wagon, waving it colorfully at the squadron. Hey you, Akielans! Damon's stomach clenched, and he took an impotent step forward. Stop him, said Nicandros, making a similar movement forward. Too late. On the horizon, the squadron was wheeling like a flock of starlings. I am suddenly rocketed back to when a certain bitch who we love so much nudged a tile off a roof. It was too late to stop it. Too late to grab at Laurent's ankle. The squadron had seen them. Brief visions of strangling Laurent weren't helpful. Damon looked at Nicandros. They were outnumbered, and there was nowhere to hide in this wide, flat plain. The two of them subtly squared off towards the approaching squadron. Damon judged the distance between himself and the nearest of the approaching soldiers, his chances of killing them, of killing enough of them to even the odds for the others. Laurent was clambering down from the wagon top, still clutching the silk. He greeted the squadron with a relieved voice and an exaggerated version of his Varetian accent. "But thank you, officer. What could we have done if you hadn't stopped? We have 18 bolts of cloth to deliver to Milo of Argos. Milo of Argos. And as you can see, Christoffel has sold us a defective wagon." The officer in question was identifiable by his superior horse. He had short dark hair under his helmet, and the kind of unyielding expression that only came with extensive training. He looked around for an Achiellan, and found Damon. Damon tried to keep his own expression bland and not look at the wagons. The first was full of cloth, but the second was full of Jocasta, with Guillaume and his wife also crammed in there. The moment the doors were flung open, they would be revealed. There was no blue dress to save them. "You're merchants?" "We are." "What name?" said the officer. "Charles," said Damon, who was the only merchant he knew. "You are Charles, the renowned Varetian cloth merchant," said the officer skeptically, as if this was a name well known to him. "No," said Laurent, as if this was the most foolish thing in the world. "I am Charles, the renowned Varetian cloth merchant. This is my assistant, Layman." I've been waiting for Assistant Layman, otherwise known as Assistant Ship Name. Uh-huh. She thinks she's funny. In the silence, the officer tracked his gaze over Laurent, then over Damon. Then he looked at the wagon, taking in every dent, every fleck of dust, every sign of long-distance travel in minute detail. "Well, Charles," he said eventually, "it looks like you've got a broken axle." "I don't suppose your men could aid us in our repairs," said Laurent. Damon stared at him. They were encircled by 50 mounted Achiellan soldiers. Jocasta was inside that wagon. The officer said, "We're patrolling for Damianos of Achelos." "Who's Damianos of Achelos?" said Laurent. His face was utterly open, his blue eyes unblinking, upturned to the officer on his horse. "He's the king's son," Damon heard himself saying, "Castor's brother." "Don't be ridiculous, Layman. Prince Damianos is dead," said Laurent. "He is hardly the man to whom this officer is referring." Then to the officer, "I apologize for my assistant. He doesn't keep up with Achiellan affairs." On the contrary, it's believed Damianos of Achelos is alive, and that he crossed into this province with his men 6 days ago. The officer gestured to his squadron, waving them forward. "Damianos is in Achelos." To Damon's disbelief, he was waving them forward to mend the wagon. One of the soldiers asked Nicandros for a wooden block to brace the wheel. Nicandros passed it to him wordlessly. Nicandros had the slightly stupefied look that Damon remembered from several of his own adventures with Laurent. "When your wagon is repaired, we can ride with you to the inn," said the officer. "You'll be quite safe. The rest of the garrison is stationed there." He used the same tone that Laurent had used when he had said, "Who's Damianos?" It was suddenly obvious that they were not free from suspicion. A provincial officer might not feel comfortable confronting a well-known merchant on the road and searching his wagons, but at an inn he could set his men to investigate the wagons at his leisure. And why risk a fight with a dozen guards on the road when you could simply escort them back to the waiting arms of your garrison? "Thank you, officer," said Laurent without hesitating. "Lead on." The officer's name was Stavos, and when the wagon was fixed, he rode alongside Laurent, everyone trotting upright in their saddles towards the inn. Stavos' air of confidence got stronger as they rode, which brought every sense Damon had of danger to life. Yet any reluctance was a sure mark of guilt. He could only ride onwards. The inn was one of the larger hostelries in Melos, equipped for powerful guests, and its entrance was a set of great gates through which wagons and carriages could pass into a central courtyard that contained ample yards for plodding beasts of burden and stalls for good horses. Damon's sense of danger grew as they passed through the gates and into the bumpy courtyard. There was a sizable barracks, the inn obviously used as a waypoint for military in the region. It was a common enough arrangement in the provinces. Merchants and travelers of good birth appreciated and even subsidized. Subsidies is a different word. And even subsidized a military presence, which elevated an establishment over the usual public houses where not even a slave, if they possessed a shred of respectability, would risk eating. He counted 100 soldiers. Thank you, Stavos. We can take it from here. Not at all. Let me escort you inside. Very well. Laurent showed no sign of hesitation whatsoever. Come, layman. Damon followed him in, acutely aware that he was being separated from his men. Laurent simply walked into the inn. The inn had a high ceiling in the Achiellan style, and a gigantic spitfire in the hearth, the spit briefly overwhelming the room with the scent of its roasting beef. There was only one other group of guests, half visible through an open walk-through, sitting around a table in animated discussion. To the left, there was a stone staircase leading up to the second floor sleeping rooms. 2 Achiellan soldiers had taken up position at the entry. Another 2 were posted at the far door, and Stavos himself had brought a small escort of 4 soldiers in with him. Damon thought, absurdly, that the unrailed stairs... Can I read? Do I read for a living? I don't know. Maybe that's a job I'll have someday. Damon thought, absurdly, that the unrailed stairs could be high ground in a fight, as if they could take on an entire garrison, just the 2 of them. Perhaps he could overwhelm Stavos. He could negotiate some kind of exchange, Stavos' life for their freedom. Stavos was introducing Laurent to the innkeeper. This is Charles, the renowned Venetian cloth merchant. That isn't Charles, the renowned Venetian cloth merchant. The innkeeper looked at Laurent. I can assure you that I am. I can assure you, Charles the renowned merchant is already here. There was a pause. Damon found himself looking at Laurent as at the man stepping to the mark in a spear-throwing competition after the last competitor has thrown a perfect bullseye. That is impossible. Call him out here. Yes, call him out here, said Stavos, and everyone waited, while a serving boy retreated to the party of guests in the next room. A moment later, Damon heard a familiar voice. Who is this impostor claiming to be me? They came face to face with Charles, the Venetian cloth merchant. Charles had changed very little in the months since they had seen one another, his expression merchant serious, like his clothing, a heavy, expensive-looking brocade. He was a man in his late 30s, with an eager nature tempered by the kind of presence that developed over years of trading. Charles took one look at the unmistakable blue eyes and blonde hair of his prince, who he had last seen in Damon's lap, dressed as a pet in a tavern at Nessun. His eyes widened. Then, with a truly heroic effort, "Charles!" said Charles. "If he is Charles, then who are you?" said the officer to Charles. "I," said Charles, "He is Charles. I have known him these 8 years," said the innkeeper. "That's right. He is Charles. I am Charles. We're cousins," said Charles, gamely. "Named after our grandfather. Charles." "Thank you, Charles. This man believes I am the king of Achielos," said Laurent. "I simply meant that you might be an agent of the king," said Stavos irritably. "An agent of the king when he has raised taxes and threatens to bankrupt the entire cloth industry," said Laurent. Damon put his eyes somewhere where they wouldn't meet Laurent's, while everyone else stared at him, at his blonde face with its pale, arched brows, spreading his hands, a Venetian gesture to go with his Venetian accent. I think we can all agree he isn't the king of Achielos, said the innkeeper. If Charles vouches for his cousin, that must satisfy the garrison. I certainly do vouch for him, said Charles. After a moment, Stavros made a stiff bow. My apologies, Charles. We are taking every precaution on the roads. There is no need to apologize, Stavros. Your vigilance does you credit. Laurent gave a stiff little bow of his own. Then he drew off his riding cloak and passed it to Damon to carry. In disguise again, Charles said sotto voce, as he drew Laurent over to his table by the fire. I'm guessing from context clues that sotto voce is an Italian phrase for, a quieter voice. Kind of like how, there's a similar term in music that denotes when to play gently, but the actual term leaves me at this moment. What is it this time? A mission for the crown? A secret rendezvous? No fear, your highness. It's my honor to keep your secret. Charles MVP. Charles introduced Laurent to the 6 men at the table, and they each expressed their surprise and delight at meeting Charles's young cousin in Achielos. This is my assistant, Guillaume. This is my assistant, Layman, said Laurent. That was how Damon found himself at a table full of Venetian merchants in an inn in Achielos discussing cloth. There were 6 men in Charles's party in total, all merchants. Laurent found a seat close to Charles and the silk merchant Mathelin. Layman was relegated to a small 3-legged stool at the table end. Servants brought out flatbreads dipped in oil, olives, and meats shaved from the spit. Red wine was decanted into mixing bowls and drunk with shallow cups. It was decent wine, and there were no flutists or dancing boys, which was the best one could hope for at a public inn, Damon thought. Guillaume came to talk to him, since they were the same rank. Layman, that's an unusual name. It's patron, said Damon. You speak very good Achielan, he said, loudly and slowly. Thank you, said Damon. Nicandros had to stand awkwardly by the end of the table when he arrived. He frowned when he realized he had to give his report to Laurent. The wagons are unpacked, Charles. Thank you, soldier, said Laurent, adding expansively to the group. We usually operate in Delphur, but I've been forced to come south. Nicandros is completely useless as the Kairos, Laurent said, loudly enough for Nicandros to hear him. He doesn't know the first thing about cloth. That is so true, agreed Mathelin. Charles said, he disallowed trading in Kemptian silk, and when I tried to sell silk from Varennes, he taxed it at 5 sols a bolt. This was greeted with the exclamations of disapproval that it deserved, and the conversation moved on to the hardships of border trading and the unrest plaguing supply trains. If it was true that Damianos had returned in the north, Charles expected this to be his last consignment before the roads closed. War was coming, and they could expect lean times. The speculation was on the price of grain in wartime and of the impact on producers and growers. No one knew much about Damianos, or why their own prince had allied with him. Charles met the Prince of Vere once, Guillaume said to Damon, lowering his voice to the conspiratorial, in a tavern in Nessen, disguised as a, lowering it further, prostitute. Damon looked over at Laurent, who was deep in conversation, letting his eyes pass slowly over every familiar feature, the cool expression tipped with gold in the firelight. He said, Did he? Charles said, Think of the most expensive pet you've ever seen, then double it. Really? Said Damon. Of course. Charles knew who he was right away because he couldn't hide his princely style and nobility of spirit. Of course, said Damon. Across the table, Laurent was asking questions about cultural differences in trade. Venetians liked ornate fabrics and dyes, weavings and ornamentations, Charles said, but Achielans had a sharper focus on quality, and their textiles were in truth more sophisticated, every aspect of the weave revealed by their deceptively simple styles. In some ways, it was harder to trade here. Maybe you could encourage Achielans to wear sleeves. You'd sell more cloth, said Laurent. Everyone laughed politely at the joke, and then speculative looks crossed one or two faces, as if this young cousin of Charles's might have stumbled by accident onto a good idea. You know, I love it, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before. I love it when you can feel anyone involved in a story having way too much fun. And the thing about that entire sequence is that the characters were having too much fun. Well, Laurent, anyway, was having too much fun. The story itself was having too much fun. And then by extension, you could feel C.S. Picot having way too much fun. And then, as a result, we have way too much fun. Yet again, I have yet to encounter something that this woman can't do. She can do violence. She can do sadness. She can do deep sadness. She can do grossness, disgustingness. She can do military machinations. She can do the cloth trade, apparently, at least enough to summarize and give an air of legitimacy to the conversation. She can do traveling. She can do entire books at a single location. She can do whipping and torture. She can do unbelievably soft romance. She can do dead-ass, serious, grave, weighty moments. She can do lighthearted posing as Charles the cloth merchant in front of Charles the cloth merchant. I'm waiting to find something she can't do. That was a scene break. I don't know if I said that. Their men were sleeping in the outbuildings. Damon, the assistant, checked in on both the soldiers and the wagons and saw that Jord and most of the others had bedded down for the night. Guillaume was in the outbuilding too, uncomfortably. Pascal was snoring. Lazare and Pallas were sharing a blanket. Nicandros was awake with the two soldiers who were guarding the wagons where Jocaste was spending the night, along with Guillaume's wife, Lois. It's the way she drops in every now and then. She just drops in a little sentence about Lazare and Pallas. A sentence, sometimes half a sentence, in regards to kind of what's going on with Lazare and Pallas. And so it feels like in the background, you see the progression of Lazare and Pallas. Waiting for something she can't do. All's quiet, reported Nicandros. One of the inn men came out with a lantern in his hand, traversing the courtyard to tell Layman that his room was prepared, second door to the right. He followed the lantern. Inside, the inn was dark and quiet. Charles and his party had retired, and only the last of the embers were burning in the spitfire. The stone stairs nestled along the wall were unbanistered, which was typical of Achiellan architecture, but trusted a great deal in the sobriety of the patrons. He ascended the stairs. Without the lantern, there was quite a bit of unlit gloom, but he found the second door to the right and pushed it open. The room was cozy, simple, its stone walls thickly plastered, its fireplace with a warming fire. It had a bed, a wooden table with a pitcher, two small windows with deep sills, the glass panes black, the inside well lit. 3 candles burning, an extravagance, flaming low, giving the room a warm, welcoming glow. Laurent was haloed in candlelight, all cream and gold. He was freshly bathed, his hair drying. He had exchanged his Achiellan cotton for an oversized Venetian bedshirt, loose and trailing laces. And he had dragged all of the bedding from the small Achiellan-style bed and heaped it in front of the fire, even dragging the clean mattress down to join the smaller pallet there. Damon looked at the bedding and said, carefully, "The innsman sent me here." "At my instruction," said Laurent. He was coming forward. Damon felt his heart begin to pound, even as he held himself still and tried not to make any dangerous assumptions. Laurent said, "It's our last chance for a real bed before the kings meet." Damon didn't have time to answer that Laurent had dismantled the bed, because Laurent was pressing against him. His hands came up automatically to grasp Laurent's sides over the thin fabric of the bedshirt. They were kissing, Laurent's fingers in his hair, pulling his head down. He could feel the sweat and the dirt of 3 days' ride on himself against Laurent's clean, fresh skin. Laurent didn't seem to care, even seemed to like it. Damon pressed him into the wall and took his mouth. Laurent smelled of soap and fresh cotton. Damon's thumbs pushed into his waist. I need to bathe, he said into Laurent's ear, let his lips find the sensitive skin just behind it. They were kissing again, deep, heated kisses. So go and bathe. He found himself pushed backwards, looking at Laurent across a stretch of space. Leaned against the wall, Laurent indicated to the small wooden door with his chin, his pale brows arched. Or do you expect me to attend you? In the adjoining room, he looked around at the soaps and fresh towels, the large wooden tub full of steaming water and the smaller bucket alongside it. All of it had been arranged in advance, a servant bringing the towels and drawing the hot water. The evidence of planning was in fact very like Laurent, though Damon had never experienced it from him quite in this context before. Laurent didn't follow him in, but left him to wash, a utilitarian task. It felt good to slough off the dust and dirt of the road, and there was something tantalizing about breaking off to spend an interval washing. They had not before had the luxury of extended lovemaking, deliberate and unhurried as a first night. His thoughts ribboned with all the things they had yet to do. He soaped his body thoroughly. He dumped water over his hair, scrubbed it, dried himself all over with the towel, and stepped from the wooden tub. When he returned to the bedchamber, his skin was flushed from the steam and water, the towel looped around his waist, his bare torso and shoulders damp with scattered droplets from the tips of his hair. Here, too, was evidence of planning, and he could see it now for what it was, the lit candles, the joint bedding, and Laurent himself, cleaned and dressed in a bedshirt. He thought of Laurent, waiting for him expectantly. It was charming, because it was clear that Laurent was unsure exactly what to do, yet typically had acted to take control of everything. First time to entertain a lover. Just saying the word made him flush, and he saw Laurent flush too. Yeah, God, sometimes you get a little reminder of the young men that they really are. Laurent said, Are you bathed? Yes, said Damon. Laurent was standing on the other side of the room, near the stripped-down bed. He looked tense in the flame light, a nervy steeling of himself. Laurent said, Take a step back. Damon had to look behind himself briefly, because stepping meant his back hit the wall. The pallet and bedding were on the floor to his left. The wall was a firm presence at his back. Put your hands on the plaster, Laurent said. The 3 flames on their candle wicks made the light move, heightening Damon's sense of the room. Laurent was coming forward, his blue eyes dark. As he did so, Damon placed his palms flat on the plaster behind him. Laurent's eyes were on him. The room was quiet, the thick walls meaning that the only sound was from the fire. Even the outside was no more than a reflection of candlelight in the black glass panes of the window. Are we holding hands yet? Take off the towel, said Laurent. Damon lifted one hand from the wall, tugging the towel loose. It unwound and slid from his waist to the floor. He watched Laurent react to his body. Virgins and the inexperienced tended to get nervous, which he enjoyed as a challenge to be overcome. Hesitancy turned into eagerness and pleasure. It pleased some deep part of him to see in Laurent the flickering of a similar reaction. Laurent eventually lifted his gaze from the place where it had, instinctively, dropped. He let Laurent see him, see his nakedness was on display, the strident fact of his arousal. The flames in the stone hearth were too loud as they consumed the young cut wood. Don't touch me, said Laurent, and dropped to his knees on the floor of the inn. The simple sight of it outstripped words or thought. Damon's pulse escalated wildly, even as he tried rather desperately not to presume that any other action would necessarily follow from this one. Laurent wasn't looking back up at him. He was looking at Damon's nakedness. Laurent's lips were parted, the strain in him greater now that he was closer to its source. Damon felt the first flutter of Laurent's breath against him. Laurent was going to do it. When you see a panther opening its jaws, you don't get your dick out. Damon didn't move, didn't breathe. Laurent had a hand on him, and all Damon could do was stand, palms and back flat against the wall behind him. The idea of the frigid Prince of Vere sucking his cock was impossible. Laurent put his own palm to the wall. He could see the planes of Laurent's face from this different angle. The pale sweep of his lashes hid the blue eyes beneath. The quiet room around them was a surreal backdrop of simple furniture and a stripped bed. Laurent put his mouth to the tip. Damon's head hit the plaster. His whole body fired, and he made a sound, rough and low with need, a moment of pure sensation, closing his eyes. His eyes opened in time to see Laurent's lowered head draw back, so that the whole thing might have been imaginary, except that the tip was wet. Confined against the wall, Damon felt the rough plaster under his palms. Laurent's eyes were very dark, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, clearly struggling with something, as he leaned in again. "Laurent," he said, a groan. Laurent's lips were on him again, parting. Damon was panting. He wanted to move, to thrust, and couldn't. It was too much and not enough, trying to control his body, holding himself still against every instinct of his nature. His fingers dug into the plaster. Whatever battle was taking place in Laurent's head didn't impede his slow skill, the sensual attention that ignored any rhythm or desire for climax but was unbearably exquisite. Laurent must be able to taste him, the salty beating of his desire, his need. That thought was almost too much. He was too close to the brink. He hadn't imagined it like this. He knew Laurent's mouth, knew its vicious capability. He knew it as Laurent's primary weapon. In his daily life, Laurent held his lips taut, repressing their lush shape into a hard line, his mouth cruel curves. Damon had seen Laurent eviscerate people with that mouth. Now Laurent's lips were given over to pleasure, his words traded for Damon's cock. He was going to come in Laurent's mouth. That single stunning realization arrived a moment before Laurent went down in earnest, a long, practiced slide. Heat hit, a burst of it, and Damon came in a rush before he could stop himself, too soon, overwhelmed, flooded. His body convulsed, even as he fought not to move, his stomach clenched, his fingers gripping the plaster. Eventually, his eyes came open. His head was leaned back against the wall, and he watched as, dark-eyed, Laurent backed off. He half expected Laurent to go to the fire and fastidiously spit, but he didn't. He had swallowed. He was pressing the back of his hand to his mouth, and he stood all the way over by the window, watching Damon a little warily. Damon pushed himself away from the wall. When he reached Laurent, he put his palm on the plaster again, this time beside Laurent's head. He could see the rise and fall of Laurent's breath in the space between them, Laurent's body unmistakably aroused by what he had just done. It was clear that Laurent didn't know how to process the fact that he was turned on, and that part of his wariness was that he was uncertain what was next, one of the strange gaps in his experience that Damon couldn't predict. In the dim light, Laurent said, "A fair exchange, is it?" "I don't know. What do you want?" Laurent's eyes were very dark. Damon could almost see the struggle, Laurent's tension rising visibly. For a moment, Damon didn't think Laurent was going to answer, the truth of his desire too painfully vulnerable. "Show me," said Laurent, "how it could be." He flushed after he said it, the words leaving him exposed, a young, inexperienced man against the plaster wall of the inn. Outside was the hostile expanse of Archelos, full of enemies and people who wanted them dead, a dangerous landscape that must be traversed before either of them was safe. In here, they were alone. The candlelight turned Laurent's hair to gold, flamed in the dip of his lashes, the line of his throat. Damon imagined that he was paying court to him in some foreign land, where all of this had never happened, making love to him in words on a balcony, perhaps, with perfumed flowers from some night garden drifting upwards, the glow of a party behind them, a suitor daring the limits of attention. "I would court you," said Damon, "with all the grace and courtesy that you deserve." He undid the first lace on Laurent's shirt, and the fabric began to open, a glimpse of the hollow of his throat. Laurent's lips were parted. his breath hardly stirring. Damon said, "There'd be no lies between us." He opened the second lace, felt the low throb of his own pulse, the warmth of Laurent's skin as his fingers moved to the third. "We'd have time," Damon said, "to be together." And in the warm flame light, he lifted his hand and cupped Laurent's cheek, and then leaned in and kissed him on the lips gently. He felt Laurent's shock, as though he had not expected to be kissed after what he had just done. After a moment, Laurent kissed back. The way Laurent kissed was nothing like the way he did anything else. It was simple and without artifice, as if kissing were serious. And there was an expectant feel to it, as if he was waiting for Damon to take control of the kiss. Making a note. When he didn't, Laurent angled his head differently, and his fingers curled into Damon's hair, still damp from the baths. The kiss deepened at Laurent's bidding. Damon could feel Laurent's body against him, and he slid his hand inside Laurent's open shirt, liking how it felt to spread his palm there, the sort of proprietary touch he wouldn't have dreamed of before tonight, and still half expected Laurent to kill him for. Laurent made a small sound of encouragement, breaking off the kiss for a moment and closing his eyes, all his attention on Damon's touch. "You like it slow?" He dipped his head near Laurent's ear. "Yes." He kissed Laurent's neck very softly, even as his palms smoothed slowly over skin inside Laurent's shirt. Laurent's overfine skin was more sensitive than his own, though during the day Laurent ruthlessly strapped himself into the most severe clothing possible. He wondered if Laurent repressed sensation for the same reason that he struggled to admit it now, his jaw taut. He's so insightful, he just doesn't know. His own body was rousing again, as the thought of sliding into Laurent slowly, taking him as slowly as he liked for a long, drawn-out interval of time, until they didn't know where one of them ended and the other began. When Laurent lifted his shirt up and off, and stood naked before him as he had once, long ago, in the baths, Damon couldn't help stepping forward, brushing Laurent's skin with his fingertips, his eyes following his touch from chest to hip. Laurent's body was golden cream in the flame light. Laurent was looking at him in turn, as though Damon's physicality was more pronounced now that they were both naked. It was Laurent who pushed him down onto the bedding. Laurent's hands were on him. Laurent touched him as if to learn the shape and feel of his body, as if to catalog every part of him and commit it to memory. Damon felt the heat of the fire against his skin as they kissed. Laurent broke off and appeared to have come to a decision, his breathing quickened but controlled. "Make me come," he said, and placed Damon's hand between his legs. Damon closed his hand. The breathing perhaps got a little more difficult to control. "Like that?" "No. Slower." There was no noticeable change in Laurent, other than his lips parting, his lashes lowering a fraction. Laurent's reactions had always been subtle, his preferences never obvious. He hadn't been able to come in Ravenel with Damon's mouth on his cock. He didn't know whether he could come now, Damon realized. He slowed right down, so that for a moment there was nothing other than a tight grip and the slow movement of his thumb on the head. He felt Laurent's flushed, erect cock in his hand, liking the weight of it. It was beautifully shaped and in pleasing proportion to its owner. His knuckles brushed the line of fine gold hair that trained down from Laurent's navel. His own body's renewed interest had grown from lazy arousal to primed, heavy, ready to mount even as he put it aside to watch Laurent attempt to let his guard down. He felt the repression when it came, the hard restraint that Laurent exerted over his body, his stomach clenching, a muscle moving in his jaw. He knew what it signaled. Damon didn't stop moving his hand. You don't like to come. Is that a problem? His breathing shallow, Laurent didn't quite manage the approximation of his usual tone. Not for me. I'll tell you how it was when I'm done. Laurent swore once, succinctly, and the world flipped. Laurent suddenly on top of him, his body painfully aroused. On his back, Damon felt the straw mattress beneath him, and looked up at Laurent above him. His own desire flared at the reversal, even as he took Laurent in his hand and said, "Come on, then." It felt ridiculously daring to tell Laurent, in any respect, what to do. The first thrust against him was deliberate, a push of heat into his hand. Laurent's eyes were on his. He could feel that it was new for Laurent to do this, just as it was new for him to feel like he was receiving it. He wondered if Laurent had ever fucked anyone in earnest, and he realized with a jolt of shock that Laurent hadn't. The flood of heat that came at that wasn't comfortable. And then, like Laurent, he was suddenly somewhere he had never been. "I've," said Damon. "Never." "Nor have I," said Laurent. "You'd be my first." Everything was magnified. The sensation of Laurent's cock sliding so near his own, the slow roll of hips, the flush of skin. The heat of the fire was too hot, his palm on Laurent's flank feeling the muscle's rhythmic flex there. Looking up at Laurent, Damon's own eyes were showing more than he knew, showing everything, and Laurent was responding, thrusting against him. "As you'd be mine," he heard himself say. Laurent said, "I thought that in Achilleos a first night was special." "For a slave it is," said Damon. "For a slave it means everything." Laurent's first shudder came with his first sound. Unconscious with exertion, his body driving him now. It was happening with their eyes wide on each other, Damon's arousal spiraling out of control. Climax hit even though they were not inside each other's bodies, but joined together, one. Laurent was panting above him, his body still jerking with aftershocks, the intervals between them longer. His head was turned to the side, not looking at Damon, as if too much had been shared. Damon had his hand against Laurent's flushed skin, could feel the beat of Laurent's heart against him. He felt Laurent shifting too soon. Laurent detached himself, while Damon sprawled on his back, one arm raised above his head, his own body taking longer to recover. With Laurent gone, he felt the warmth of the fire once again against his skin, and heard the crack and spark of its flame. He watched Laurent across the room to fetch towels and a pitcher of water before his breathing had even settled. He knew that Laurent was fastidious after lovemaking, and he liked that he knew it, liked that he was learning Laurent's idiosyncrasies. Laurent paused, touching his fingers to the wooden edge of the table and just breathing in the dim light. Laurent's post-coital habits were also an excuse, covering a need to take a moment to himself, and Damon knew that, too. When he returned, Damon let Laurent towel him down, with the sweet, unanticipated attentiveness that was also part of the way Laurent behaved in bed. He sipped from the shallow cup that Laurent provided, and poured water for Laurent in turn, which Laurent didn't seem to expect. Laurent sat awkwardly upright on the bedding. Damon stretched out comfortably, and waited for Laurent to do the same. That took minutes longer than it would have with any other lover. Eventually, with that same stiff awkwardness, Laurent lay down next to him. Laurent was closer to the fire, the room's only remaining source of illumination, and it created wells of light and shadow across his body. "You're still wearing it." He couldn't help but say it. Laurent's wrist was heavy with gold, like the color of his hair in the firelight. "So are you." "Tell me why." "You know why," said Laurent. They lay alongside one another, among the sheets and the mattress and the flat cushions. He rolled onto his back and looked up at the ceiling. He could feel the beat of his own heart. "I'll be jealous when you marry your patron princess," Damon heard himself say. The room was quiet after he said it. He could hear the fire again, and was too aware of his own breathing. After a moment, Laurent spoke. "There will be no patron princess, or daughter of the Empire. It's your duty to continue your line." He didn't know why he said it. There were marks on the ceiling, which was paneled and not plastered, and he could see the dark whorls and grain of the wood. No. I'm the last. My line ends with me. Damon turned to find Laurent was not looking back at him, but also had his eyes on some point in the dim light. Laurent's voice was quiet. I've never said that to anyone before. Damon didn't want to disturb the silence that followed, the handspan that separated their bodies, the careful space between them. I'm glad you're here, said Laurent. I always thought that I'd have to face my uncle alone. He turned to look at Damon, and their eyes met. You're not alone, said Damon. Laurent didn't answer, but he did give a smile and reached out to touch Damon wordlessly. Okay. That's a scene break. That's not even like a chapter end. That's a scene break. So we're on page 270. We are late for our midpoint break. So Liv has got to stop making jokes in the chat. And I will be back here in a little bit. I'm going to do my best to shorten the break since we're running a little bit late. And we'll come back with the last third, I suppose, since we're late, of the stream, as opposed to the second half. But let's all take a breather. We've been holding hands. We can let go for a second. We can stretch that out, you know? Get up, walk around, scream into a pillow if you feel so inclined, and I'm gonna grab some more water, and I'll be back in just a second. Whew. And welcome back. I might be overthinking this. Did I drift over here by the time we went to the break? I don't know. Maybe I didn't, but it feels like I did. I don't know. I'm probably overthinking this. It's mostly the tripod thing, which is being fixed soon. But I just can't help but feeling like I start out here, and then by the time we get to a break, I'm like over here in this corner of the screen. Anyway, Love Bunnies actually brought something up that was really interesting that I saw. She expressed kind of disappointment if they don't actually follow through on the Laurent and Damon switching thing. And what's interesting about that is that for the time that this book came out, that this trilogy happened in like the mid 2010s, we were still like really rigid in terms of top bottom dynamics, and hell, we're still pretty rigid about it. But and so I always take it as, I mean, outside of just you get teased something that you want to see and then you don't see it, which is obviously, you know, like disappointing because you're like, well, then give it to me, like that kind of thing. Somewhat separate from that is kind of the idea that even C.S. Picot teasing the idea that they are open to that and that would be something that they do was already kind of low-key breaking the mold a little bit, and even acknowledging that that's like a reality, because usually in the mid-2010s and before, it was very much like never the two shall deviate from their assigned roles in this narrative. I can't remember if they follow through with that or not, or if it's mentioned or talked about again. I can't remember whether or not it's in the rest of this book or in Summer Palace. I can't remember. But it's been interesting to watch that evolution of trying to break down the fictional stereotypes. It's never really, like, obviously I've noticed it, and I appreciate the just general opening up of more realistic possibilities. I usually tend to be kind of exclusively down for whatever primary configuration a story seems to be going with. So I've never personally felt a desire usually to see the tables turned, so to speak. But it's still obviously like there are plenty of people who are most decidedly not like me in this sense. So while obviously you would love to see a narrative really like vary itself like that and really step into what is usually a bit more of a realistic depiction, given the time that it came out, I always took that acknowledgement as oh my God, she's like acknowledging the possibilities. That alone kind of seemed like a win for me. So that's really interesting that you said that. Where? Oh, here's the book. I don't even know where the book went. We are on page 270. Did I say that before the break? I don't remember anything from one moment to the next. It's really impressive how I managed to get out of bed in the morning. We are going to... Oh, we're definitely going to get through there. We're going to get somewhere into chapter 16. Maybe... maybe we'll get through... Maybe we'll get through chapter 16 today. We'll see. It might be a stretch. We might have to stop at a scene break again. In the whole book, there are, I think there's like 20? 19... Oh, no, 19, excuse me. There's only 19. They parted ways with Charles 6 days later, after they crossed into the southernmost province of Acielos. It had been a winding, relaxed journey, the days passing in a drone of summer insects and afternoon rest stops to avoid the worst of the heat. Charles's wagon train lent them respectability, and they passed Castor's patrols without difficulty. Jord taught dice to Octus, who taught him some choice Achielan vocabulary. Lazar pursued Pallas with the kind of lazy confidence that would have Pallas lifting up his skirt as soon as they stopped somewhere with any semblance of privacy. Pascal gave free advice to Lydos, who went away relieved about the medical nature of his problems. When the days got too hot, they retreated to inns and warehouses, and once a large farmhouse where they ate bread, hard cheese, and figs, and Achillean sweets of honey and nuts that attracted wasps in the sticky heat. At the farmhouse, Damon found himself at an outside table, across from Pascal, who nodded his chin at Laurent, visible in the distance under the cooling branches of a tree. He's not used to the heat. That was true. Laurent was not made for the Achillean summer, and during the day decamped to the shade of the wagons or, at rest stops, stayed under awnings or the leafy shade of a tree, but he gave little other overt sign of it, neither complaining nor shirking when work needed to be done. You never told me how you ended up in Laurent's faction. I was the regent's physician. So you ministered to his household. And to his boys, said Pascal. Damon said nothing. After a moment, Pascal said, Before he died, my brother served in the king's guard. I never swore my brother's oath to the king, but I like to think that I'm carrying it out. Damon made his way down to the stream, where Laurent stood, his back leaned against the trunk of a young cypress. He was wearing sandals and the white cotton... Oh, I can't decide if it's chitin, kitten, or chitin, so we'll go with chitin for fuck's sake. Loose and wonderful, his eyes on the view. Achilleos, beneath a wide blue sky. The hills rolled down to a distant coast, where the ocean gleamed and the houses clustered, painted white as sails with similar geometry. The architecture had the simple elegance that Achilleans prized in their art, in their mathematics, in their philosophy, in which he had seen Laurent respond to silently on the journey. Damon stopped for a moment, but it was Laurent who turned and said, It's beautiful. It's hot, said Damon. Reaching the pebbled bank, Damon leaned down and scooped a cloth into the stream's clear water. He came forward. Here, said Damon, softly. After a slight hesitation, Laurent tipped his head forward and allowed Damon the delight of drizzling cool water over the back of his neck, while he closed his eyes and made a soft, sweet sound of relief. Only this close could you see the faint flush on his cheeks and the slight sweat damp at the roots of his hair. Damon just wants to take care of Laurent. I don't know what to tell you. Your Highness, Charles and the merchants are preparing to depart. Pallas caught them with their heads close together, a trickle of water running down the back of Laurent's neck. Damon looked up, his palm braced against the rough bark of the tree. I see that you used to be a slave and that Charles has freed you, Guillaume said to him, as they prepared to part ways. Guillaume spoke very earnestly. I want you to know that Charles and I have never traded in slaves. Damon looked out at the weird beauty of the gnarled landscape. He heard himself say, Damianos will end slavery when he becomes king. Thank you, Charles. We cannot endanger you any further. Laurent was making his own farewells to the merchants. It was my honor to ride with you, said Charles. Laurent clasped his hand. When Damianos of Achilleos takes the throne, mention my name and tell him you helped me. He'll give you a good price on your cloth. Nicandros was looking at Laurent. He's very... You get used to it, said Damon, with a little wellspring of joy inside him, because that wasn't really true. They made camp for the last time in a small copse that provided them cover, on the edge of the wide, flat plain where the king's meet surmounted the only rise. It was visible in the distance, high stone walls and marble columns, a place of kings. Tomorrow he and Laurent would travel there, and rendezvous with the wet nurse, who would exchange herself and her small, precious consignment for Jocast's freedom. He looked out at it and felt a belief in the future, and real hope. His mind full of thoughts of the morning, he lay himself down on his bedroll next to Laurent and slept. That's a scene break. A full, real commitment from Damon about abolishing slavery when he becomes king. Yep. I mean, I can say it over and over again until we get to the actual end, and I will, but So many reasons. So many reasons why one of the mantras of this series is, if you've only read the first book, you haven't read Captive Prince. Laurent lay beside Damon until all the sounds of the camp were quiet, and then, when Damon was sleeping and there was no one to stop him, Laurent rose and made his way alone through the sleeping camp to the borrowed wagon that held Jocasta. Excuse me. I don't remember a second meeting of Laurent and Jocasta. I don't remember this. Wait. It was very late by then, and all the stars were out in the Achelan sky, and that was strange. To be here so close to the end of his own plans, so close to the end, really, of everything. To be where he'd never dreamed he would be, and to know that by morning this would be finished, or at least his part in it. Laurent moved silently past the sleeping soldiers, to the place, a little distance away, where the wagon stood, still and quiet. Then, because there should be no witnesses to this, he dismissed the guards. All bad things were done in the dark. The wagon was open to the night air, with the iron bars of its inner door keeping the prisoner inside. He came to stand in front of it. Jocasta watched all of this happen, and didn't flinch from it, nor did she scream or plead for help, as he had thought she would not. She just met his gaze calmly through the bars. So you do have your own plans? Yes, said Laurent. And he stepped forward, unlocking the barred door to the wagon, and let it swing open. He stepped back. He had no weapon with him. It was simply a path to freedom. Not far off, there was a saddled horse. Eos was a half-day's ride. She didn't walk through the open door, but just gazed at him, and in the cool, steady blue of her eyes were all the ways that leading the wagon was a trap. He said, I think it's Castor's child. Jocasta didn't answer him, and there was a silence in which her gaze was on him. Laurent regarded her in turn. Around them, the camp stayed quiet, no sounds except for the breeze and the night. I think you saw it clearly in those twilight days in Achielos. The end was coming, and Damianos wouldn't listen to anyone. The only way to save his life was to persuade Castor to send him as a slave to Ver. To do that, you had to be in Castor's bed. Her expression didn't alter, but he felt the change in her, the new, careful way she was holding herself. In the cool night air, it transmitted something to him, against her will. It gave something away, and she was angry about it, and for the first time, she was afraid. He said, I think it's Castor's child, because I don't think you would use Damon's child against him. Then you underestimate me. Do I? He held her gaze. I suppose we'll find out. Laurent tossed the key into the wagon in front of the place where she stood unmoving. We're alike. You said that. Would you have opened the door for me? I don't know. But you opened one for him. Her voice was wiped clean of inflection, ruthlessly, so that nothing showed but a mocking, mild bitterness. You mean, the only difference between us is that I chose the wrong brother? As the stars began to drift across the sky, Laurent thought about Nicaise, standing in the courtyard with a handful of sapphires. I don't think you chose, said Laurent. I don't remember any of that. that was the end of the chapter. I what? I just brain rearranged. I don't. Wow. That was like several mind-bending lines all back together, back to back, of course. Jesus. Damn. I'm just sitting here for a second. Jesus. We're on page 277 for chapter 16. Good fucking God. Okay. It was better not to drag Jocasta out of her wagon until the exchange was guaranteed, Laurent said. And so the two of them rode to the King's Meet alone. That suited the King's Meet's own protocols. The King's Meet strictly enforced its laws of nonviolence. It was a sanctum, a place for parley, with centuries-old rules of peace. Pilgrims could enter, but groups of soldiers were not permitted inside its walls. There were 3 stages to their approach. First, across the long plains, then past the gates. Finally, they would enter the hall, and from there pass into the inner chamber that housed the Kingstone. The King's Meet on the horizon was a white marble crown, commanding its vantage from the only rise on the wide, dusty plain. Every white-cloaked soldier in the King's Meet would see Damon's approach with Laurent, 2 humble pilgrims here on horseback to make their tribute. You approach the King's Meet. Announce your purpose. The man's voice was very small, descending from an immense height of 50 feet. Damon shaded his eyes and called back, We are travelers, here to pay tribute to the Kingstone. Take the pledge, traveler, and be welcome. With the sound of a chain screaming, the portcullis rose. They took their horses up the rise to the gates, past the huge, heavy iron portcullis enclosed by 4 immense stone towers, as at Carthus. Inside, they dismounted to meet an older man, whose white cloak was fixed to his shoulder with a gold pin, and who, when they ceremonially gave over a great deal of gold in tribute, advanced to put a white sash around each of their necks. Damon had to bend slightly for it. This is a place of peace. No blow may be struck, no sword may be drawn. The man who breaks the peace of the King's Meet must face the King's justice. Do you accept the pledge? Said the older man. I do, said Damon. The man turned to Laurent, who swore the same pledge. I do. And they were inside. He wasn't expecting the summer tranquility of it, the tiny flowers growing on the grassy slopes that led up to the ancient hall, massive blocks of jutting stone remnants of its long-ago first structure. He had only ever been here during ceremonies, the Kairoi and their men thronging the slopes and his father standing powerful in the hall. He had been an infant the first time he had come here, presented to the Kairoi held aloft by his father. Damon had heard the story many times, the king lifting him up, the nation's joy at the arrival of an heir after years of miscarriages, the queen seemingly unable to bring a child to term. In the stories, no one spoke of 9-year-old Castor, watching from the sidelines as a ceremony bestowed on an infant all that had been promised to him. Castor would have been crowned here. He would have called on the Kairoi as the Omedes had called on them, and been crowned in the old way, with the Kairoi in attendance and the impassive faces of the King's Meet sentries looking on. Now those sentries flanked them. They were a permanent independent military garrison, the finest chosen from each of the provinces with scrupulous neutrality to serve a 2-year term. They lived in the complex of supporting outbuildings, filling the barracks and the gymnasiums, where they slept and woke and trained with immaculate discipline. It was a soldier's greatest honor to compete in the yearly games and be chosen from the best to serve here, to uphold the strict laws. Damon said, Nicandros served here for 2 years. At 15, he had felt such pride at Nicandros's accomplishment, even as he had embraced Nicandros and felt what it meant that his closest friend was leaving him to serve alongside the greatest fighters in Achielos. Perhaps underneath that, something else, unacknowledged, was now in his voice. You were jealous. My father said that I had to learn to lead, not to follow. He was right, said Laurent. You are a king in a place of kings. They had passed the gates. They started to climb the steps up the grassy hillside towards the marble pillars that marked the entry to the hall. Each stage had sentries, white-cloaked and standing guard. 100 queens and kings of Achielos had been crowned here, the processionals taking the same path that they took now, up the marble steps that led from the gates all the way to the entrance of the hall, the steps themselves eroded by decades of ascending feet. He felt the solemnity of the place and its quiet majesty. He heard himself say, the first king of Achielos was crowned here, and every king and queen since. They passed more sentries as they walked past the pillars and into the long, cavernous space of pale marble. The marble walk was carved with figures, and Laurent paused before one of them, a woman on horseback. Ooh. Taking a wild stab at this name here. That's Kaidape? Is my best guess. That's Kaidape. She was queen before Euandros. She took the throne from King Traeus and averted civil war. And that one? That's Thestos. He built the palace at Eos. Damn. He looks like you. Thestos was carved in outline, holding a giant piece of masonry aloft. Laurent touched his bicep, then touched Damon's. Damon let out a breath. There was a transgressive thrill to walking with Laurent here. He had brought a Varetian prince into the heart of Achielos. His father would have barred the way to Laurent, not let him rise, a slender figure, utterly dwarfed by the scale of the hall. That's Necton, who broke the Kingsmeat's laws. Necton had drawn a sword to protect his brother, King... Ooh. Timon? Fuck. The Lion King fan in me wants to say Timon, but that cannot possibly be right. So we're just going to go with Timon, unless M can help me out real quick. He was pictured on his knees with an axe to his neck. King Timon had been forced to sentence his brother to death for what he had done. So strict were the ancient laws of the Kingsmeat. That's Timon, his brother. They passed them in succession. Aradne. Timon? Not the Prince Pumbaa. Be serious, Henry. Actually, don't. Timon sounds... Ooh, wait, Timon is good. I love how we've all stopped about this name. Timon sounds good to me. Not that it's going to be relevant after this paragraph, I'm sure, but still. Hello? That's Timon, his brother. They passed them in succession. Aradne, Queen of the Six, the first since Agathon to rule 6 provinces and command 6 Cairoi. Queen Agar, who had brought Isthema into the kingdom. King Euandros, who had lost Delpha. He felt the weight of those kings and queens as he had never felt it. Here before them, not as a king, but as a man. He came to a halt in front of the oldest carving, a single name chiseled crudely into the stone. That is Agathon, said Damon, the first king of Achielos. My father is descended from King Euandros, but my line runs back to Agathon through my mother. His nose is chipped, said Laurent. He unified a kingdom. My father had all the same dreams, is a thought that Damon has to himself. Damon said, everything I have has passed to me from him. They reached the end of the walk. The sentry stood, guarding the inviolable space, the inner chamber of rougher stone, the only place in Achielos where a prince could kneel to be crowned and rise a king. As it will pass, I suppose, to my son, said Damon. They entered and saw a figure waiting for them, swathed in red, sitting comfortably on the heavy, carved wooden throne. "Not quite," said the regent. That's a scene break. Let me just check something real quick. Oh, actually, that's not many pages at all. Yeah, no, we're good. We're still 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 good. Okay. Every nerve came to alert. Damon's mind flashed to ambush, double-cross, his eyes scanning the entrances for figures, for the swarm of men surrounding them. But the ring of metal, the clatter of feet, never came. There was just his heart pounding in the silence, the impassive faces of the Kingsmeat soldiers, and the regent rising and strolling forward, alone. Damon forced himself to release the hilt of his sword, which he'd gripped instinctively. The stymied desire to put his blade to the regent's throat beat in him, a thundering call to action that he must ignore. The rules of the Kingsmeat were sacrosanct. He could not draw a sword here and live. The regent stood waiting for them like a king before the kingstone, his authority carried in his bones, dressed in dark red, a royal mantle on his shoulders. The scale of the hall suited him, the commanding power he possessed, as he met Laurent's eyes. "Laurent," said the regent softly, "you've caused me a great deal of trouble." The slight flutter of the pulse in Laurent's neck belied his steady exterior. Damon could feel the reverberation that he was covering, the control he exercised over his breathing. "Have I?" said Laurent. "Oh, that's right. You had to replace a bedboy. Don't blame Bean too much. He would have been too old for you this year anyway." The regent considered Laurent, a slow perusal that took several moments. As he considered, he spoke. "These petulant remarks have never suited you. The mannerisms of a boy sit so unattractively on a man." His voice was mild, speculative, perhaps faintly disappointed. "You know, Nicaise really thought you would help him. He didn't know your nature, that you'd abandon a boy to treason and death out of petty spite. Or was there some other reason you killed him?" "Your bought whore? I didn't think anyone would miss him." Damon had to force himself not to take a step back. He had forgotten the bloodless violence of these exchanges. "He's been replaced," said the regent. "I thought he would be. You cut his head off. It makes it a little difficult for him to suck your cock." After a moment, the regent spoke musingly to Damon. "I assume whatever tawdry pleasure you get from him in bed leads you to overlook his nature. After all, you are an Achiellan. There must be satisfaction to be had in getting the Prince of Vere under you. He is unpleasant, but that would barely register when you are rutting." Damon said very steadily, "You're alone. You can't use weapons. You don't have men. You may have taken us by surprise, but that will gain you nothing. Your words are meaningless." "By surprise? You are refreshingly artless," said the regent. "Laurent was expecting me. He is here to give himself up for the child." "Laurent isn't here to give himself up," said Damon, and in the second of silence that followed his words, he turned and saw Laurent's face. Laurent was white, his shoulders straight, his silence a kind of acceptance of a deal that had long since been made between himself and his uncle. "Give yourself up, and all that is yours will be returned to you." There was something terrible suddenly about the Kingsmeat. The impassive, white-cloaked soldiers posted at intervals, the immense white stones. Damon said, "No." "My nephew is predictable," the regent said. "He has freed Jocasta because he knows that I would never trade a tactical advantage for a whore. And he has come here to give himself up for the child. He doesn't even care whose child it is. He just knows it's in danger, and that you'll never fight me while I have it. He's found the way to ensure that in the end, you will win. Give himself up in exchange for your child's life." Laurent's silence was that of a man exposed. He didn't look at Damon. He just stood, breathing shallowly, his body rigid, as though he was bracing himself. The regent said, "But that exchange doesn't interest me, nephew." In the pause that followed, Laurent's expression changed. Damon barely had time to register the volte-face before Laurent said in a tight voice, "It's a trap. You can't listen to him. We need to go." The regent spread his hands. "But I am here alone." "Damon, get out," said Laurent. "No," said Damon. "He's just one man." "Damon," said Laurent. "No." He made himself take in the regent fully, his close-cropped beard, the dark hair, and the blue eyes that were his only point of physical commonality with Laurent. "I'm the one he's come here to make a deal with," said Damon. The King's Meet, with its strict laws against violence, was the one place where two enemies could meet and strike a bargain. There was something fitting about facing the regent here in this ceremonial place made for adversaries. He said, "Tell me your terms for the child." "Oh," said the regent. "No, the child is not on offer." "I'm sorry, were you thinking of making a grand gesture? I prefer to keep him. No, I am here for my nephew. He is going to stand trial before the council. Then he will die for his crimes. I don't need to negotiate or give up the child. Laurent is going to get down on his knees and beg me to take him. Aren't you, Laurent?" Laurent said, "Damon, I told you to get out." "Laurent will never kneel to you," said Damon. He pushed himself forward to stand between Laurent and the regent. "You don't think so?" said the regent. "Damon," said Laurent. "He wants you to leave," said the regent. "Aren't you curious why?" "Damon," said Laurent. "He has knelt for me." The regent said it in a calm, matter-of-fact voice, so that it didn't penetrate at first. It was just a collection of words. Even when Damon turned, to see crimson on Laurent's cheeks like a stain. And then the meaning of those words began forcing out all other thought. I probably should have turned him away, but who can resist when a boy with a face like that asks you to stay with him? He was so lonely after his brother died. Uncle, don't leave me alone. Rage. It provided clarity and simplicity, burning away all thought. Laurent's awful expression, the movement of the white-cloaked sentries at the first scrape of steel, all of that was unimportant, flashed impressions. Damon had drawn his sword and was going to drive it into the regent's unarmed body. There was a sentry in his way. Another. The ringing sound of his sword had triggered a cascade of action. White-cloaked sentries of the King's Meet were flooding the hall, shouting orders. "Stop him!" They were in his way. He would remove them. The crunch of bone, a scream of pain. These were the best fighters in Achelos, hand-picked. They didn't matter. Nothing mattered but killing the regent. A battering blow to his head momentarily blackened his vision. He staggered, then righted himself. Another. He was surrounded, held down by 8 men struggling to contain him, others shouting for reinforcements. He half tore himself from their grip, and when he couldn't free himself, he bodily dragged them forward, wielding sheer strength against them, like wading through quicksand or through a full sea. He made it 4 steps before another blow brought him down. His knees hit the marble. His arm was wrenched behind him, and he felt the cold, hard iron before he understood what was happening. The chains on his wrists and legs hobbling him. His movement was totally restrained. Panting, on his knees, Damon began to come back to himself. His bloody, discarded sword lay on the stone 5 feet away where it had been forced from his hand. The hall was full of white cloaks, not all of them standing. One of the soldiers had his hand clutched to his stomach, where blood blossomed red across the white livery. There were 6 others on the ground near him, 3 who weren't getting up. The regent was still standing, several feet away. In the panting silence of the hall, one of the kneeling sentries rose and began to speak. "You have drawn your sword in the king's meat." Damon's eyes locked on the regent's. Nothing mattered but a promise. "I'm going to kill you." "You have broken the peace of the hall." Damon said, "The moment you laid your hands on him, you were dead." "The laws of the king's meat are sacred." Damon said, "I will be the last thing that you see. You will go to the ground with my blade in your flesh." "Your life is forfeit to the king," said the sentry. Damon heard the words. The laugh that came out of him was hollow and jagged. "The king," he said with total scorn. "Which king?" Laurent was staring at him with huge eyes. Unlike Damon, it had only taken one of the king's meat soldiers to restrain Laurent, his arms forced behind his back, his breathing shallow. "In fact, there is only one king here," said the regent. And slowly, the impact of what he had done began to make itself clear to Damon. He looked at the devastation of the king's meat, the blood-streaked marble, and gathered sentries in disarray, the peace of its sanctum shattered. "No," said Damon, "you heard what he did." Roughened, it came out of him. "You all heard him. Are you going to let him do this?" The sentry, who had risen, ignored him and approached the regent. Damon struggled again and felt the strain on his arms brought almost to breaking point by the men holding him. The sentry bowed his head to the regent, said, "You are king of Ver and not of Achielos, but the attack was against you, and a king's judgment is sacred in the king's meat. Pass your sentence." "Kill him," said the regent. He spoke with indifferent authority. Damon's forehead was pushed down to the cold stone, and there was the scrape of metal as his sword was picked up from the marble. A white-cloaked soldier came forward, holding it in the two-handed grip of the executioner. "No," said Laurent. He said it to his uncle, in a flat, emotionless voice Damon had never heard before. "Stop. It's me you want." And Damon said, "Laurent," a final, terrible understanding resolving, as Laurent said, "It's me you want, not him." The regent's voice was mild. "I don't want you, Laurent. You are a nuisance, a minor inconvenience that I will clear from my path without much thought." "Laurent," said Damon, trying to stop what was happening from his restrained position on his knees. "I'll come with you to Eos," said Laurent, in that same detached voice. "I'll let you have your trial. Just let him—" He didn't look at Damon. "Let him live. Let him walk out of your hole and alive. Take me." The soldier holding the sword halted, looking to the regent for an order. The regent's eyes were on Laurent, regarding him with considering attention. "Beg," said the regent. Laurent was held fast in the grip of a soldier, his arm twisted behind his back, the white cotton of his chiton in disarray. The soldier released him, pushing him forward into the silence. Laurent didn't quite stumble, then began steadily to take one step, then another. Laurent is going to get down on his knees and beg. Like a man walking towards a cliff edge, Laurent came forward to stand before his uncle. Slowly, he went to his knees. "Please," said Laurent. "Please, uncle. I was wrong to defy you. I deserve punishment. Please." There was a surreal horror to what was happening. No one was stopping it, this travesty of justice. The regent's eyes passed over Laurent like those of a father receiving an act of long overdue filial duty. "Is this exchange acceptable to you, Exalted?" said the sentry. "I believe it is," said the regent, after a moment. "You see, Laurent, I'm a reasonable man. When you are properly penitent, I am merciful." "Yes, uncle. Thank you, uncle." The sentry bowed. The exchange of a life satisfies our laws. Your nephew will face trial in Eos. The other will be held until morning, then released. Let the will of the king be done. The other sentries echoed the words, let the will of the king be done. Damon said, no. He was struggling again. Laurent didn't look at Damon. He kept his eyes fixed on a point in front of him, their blue slightly glazed. Under the thin cotton of his chiton, he was breathing shallowly, his body held taut, an attempt at control. Come, nephew, said the regent. They went. That was even more awful than I remembered. This is what I've been waiting for. This whole fucking time. This is what I've been waiting for. And I didn't even remember how the whole thing was. This is what makes her a genius. It feels so obvious in hindsight that this is what the regent would be doing. That they were just walking into a situation where no violence is to be had on pain of death. Of course, this would be the time when the regent is the one to drop the bomb. Of course, of course, of course, of course. And yet, it is one of the most elegantly vicious fucking decisions I've ever seen. That's so heinous and so good, and I'm so angry at so many things, and it's past 5 and I have to go. I forgot the kneeling thing. I forgot exactly what the regent said to reveal. And of course it's, I forgot Damon's promises. Oh God, I forgot so much. It's so much worse than what I remember. And this is like my favorite thing in the whole, how it's revealed to Damon is my favorite thing in the whole fucking trilogy. Which says a lot because everything is my favorite in this trilogy, but like, I can't believe, listen, it's past 5 and I have to go, but I've been so excited to get to this part because it's like now we can have a conversation and now so many things need to happen and all right. I need to go calm down. I'm going to go breathe. I'm going to go breathe and dry heave and then breathe some more. Okay. This is why I'm so happy that the book chats exist now, because now we have some space to talk about it. If you would like to talk about what we read today, patrons and YouTube members get access to a bit of a book chat that happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays before these reading streams that discusses whatever the hell we read before. So on Thursday, we're discussing what we read today. So if you would like to join us, that's what we're doing on Thursday at 2:15 with a new tripod for the camera that will let me be on time. Okay? All right. I need to collect myself. I need to leave and collect myself. Thank you so much for joining me on this stream. I am going to be going back into this live stream to the moment so that I can read the chat because I couldn't at the time. I was too busy trying to read words and not trip all over myself because of everything. But I will see you guys on Thursday for, it's not even the aftermath. It's not even the aftermath. Laurent has to be put on trial. It's not even the aftermath. That wasn't even the climax of the story. That wasn't even... I'll be back. I'll be back on Thursday. I'm going to go scream into a pillow. All right? I love you very much. Please take care of yourselves. I'll see you in a couple of days.